Hello, my name is Pastor Kris Kollar. I'm the pastor of Pleasant Valley Lutheran Church near Malabar Farm State Park and St. Paul Lutheran Church in Lucas, Ohio. Greetings. We are reading through the Bible with commentary, and we are to a new book, the book of Esther. And if you've been listening through, and if you actually listened to yesterday's sessions, thank you, because that was ridiculously long. I tried to do all of the rest of Nehemiah so we could get to Esther, and there were so many names, and I should not have done 4 chapters in one session. 2 and 2 would have been better. But oh well, here we are at Esther, and the reward is we get to read one of the funnest books in the Old Testament. So the book of Esther was a novella, a story. It is literature. It is not necessarily actual history. It is much, much more likely that this was written as literature, as an example of what it was like for the Jewish people living in exile in the Persian kingdom. It is possible that parts or some of it were actually true, because we do have the holiday of Purim that came out of it. So there probably is some grain of truth in the story, but no guarantees that it actually was a complete truth. And also there's it's a story that it's more like, where did this holiday Purim come from? And here's where it came from. I was like, I don't want to say it's not true, because it's true. All of the Bible is true. Some of the Bible is more poetic and more literature, and less concerned about the accuracy of the details. So Esther is set about 500 years before the time of Jesus, during the Persian Empire. We're going to hear about King Ahasuerus, which I don't think I'm pronouncing correctly. That might have been Ahasuerus, who was actually King Xerxes. So King Xerxes the first, because there was more than one King Xerxes. And there's no source from outside the Bible to confirm that he ever had a queen named Esther or Vashti. Not outside the realm of possibility, though. But it certainly was not written at the time that it happened. So even at the time that it was written down, it was already, well, back in the day when we had King Xerxes, here's what happened. And they're not sure exactly when it was written. It could have been written about the same time as Nehemiah and Ezra. Probably was written about the same time as Nehemiah and Ezra. Another interesting thing I read in the preliminary preparations for reading through Esther, that there was a lot of debate whether Esther should make the cut and even be in the Bible, because there's not a lot of mention of God. It's sort of this undercurrent of God's provision and care, but the actual word God and the actual, like, God doing mighty deeds does not happen. And yet here it is in the canon, with both the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, is to include the book of Esther. The other thing that I found very interesting is, as they were translating Esther, there are 3 different versions that they could use. One is what's called the Masoretic text, which means it's from the oldest Hebrew written manuscript that they could find is an old Hebrew Bible. But there's also a version of the Bible called the Septuagint, which was written in Greek for all of the people who spoke Greek. And this was written maybe 70 years before the time of Christ. And the version in the Septuagint does not agree with the Masoretic text. The version in the Septuagint adds a lot of stuff about God and makes it a lot more religious and a lot more like it should belong in the Bible. The version that we're reading right now, I believe, comes from the Masoretic and not from the Septuagint. Then it turns out there's a third translation that they found somewhere that they call the A documents, and it also does not quite agree with the other 2. So what happens, you have these ancient manuscripts from thousands and thousands of years ago. There weren't photocopiers. So how did you make a copy? Somebody sat down and wrote out a copy. And sometimes, as people were writing out copies, they made mistakes, they made omissions, they made additions, and they changed the text to be more in line with what they thought the text should have in it. And that also means that occasionally there's passages where scholars are making their best guess, but they're really not quite sure how to translate that. But they do think that this was written probably during the Persian Empire. It's certainly they knew a lot about the Persian Empire and how it operated. There's a slight chance that it didn't get written until the Greeks had invaded and taken over, but probably not. It was probably written before the Greeks had come and taken over. And it's just a very fun book to read. So I'm only going to try to do 2 chapters, and the first 2 chapters of Esther set the scene, set the story, and it's going to be tempting enough to just stop and talk about it all the way through because it is a fun book to read. So Esther chapter 1. This happened in the days of, sort of like this is a back in the day or once upon a time. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. And that is an accurate description of the Persian Empire. It was the largest known empire at the time, and it did run from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, footnote again said that there were 4 capitals in the Persian Empire. Susa was well known to be the summer capital and one of the 4. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers, the army of Persia and Media, when the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Footnote points out that 180 days is 6 months. Possibly that's a little bit of hyperbole. Might not have actually lasted 6 months, but clearly it was a big feast and it lasted a long time. Verse 5. When all these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings, and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry. I think that's a kind of pretty rock. Mosaic, anyway. There's a mosaic. Marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Now I feel like I should check what is porphyry. Drinks were served in golden goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. So he had the first banquet, which was probably all over the place, and it went for 6 months, but it's probably more like 6 months of celebrations that just kind of went all during time. But now he's got a 1-week banquet for the great and small. So that would be for the people that are around him, his officials. And I just did misspelled porphyry. It's a kind of stone. And hard igneous rock containing crystals, usually feldspar, and a fine grained, typically red ground mass. So it's a hard purple-red stone. So this mosaic has the hard purple-red stone, porphyry, marble, mother pearl, and colored stones, which is kind of cool. And I'm trying to see if I have a picture that I can do here. Not a great picture, but porphyry. So it's fancy. They're having a big banquet for a week long, in all kinds of hangings and mosaics and drinks. Verse 8, drinking was by flagons without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Apparently the tradition was you had to match the king drink for drink, but he is saying you can drink as much or as little as you wish. Verse 9, furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for all the women in the place of King Ahasuerus. Again, footnotes said that the Persians did eat together with men and women, but when the men started drinking, the women separated themselves. So she has a separate banquet going on for the women. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bitztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs, which is kind of a very shocking thing in that culture for any woman to disobey, and let alone the queen to say, "No, I'm not coming." At this the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Verse 13, Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and custom. And those next to him were Karshina, Shethar. I thought I was done with names. Oh my gosh, more names. Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, Memucan, and the 7 officials of Persia and Media who had access to the king, and sat first in his kingdom. So these are high up bigwigs. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of the king Ahasuerus, conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said, in the presence of the king and the officials, Not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media who have heard the queen's behavior will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. In other words, if we don't squash these women and maintain our authority, then they're going to actually have rights, and oh no, we can't have that. Verse 19, If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. Verse 21, This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house. It's not new. This has been happening for thousands of years. Chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in the citadel of Susa under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetic treatments be given them, and let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. In case you're not sure what a eunuch is, it's a person who used to be a man and is not a man anymore. Something has been removed. Many things, several things may have been removed. And then he is safe to take care of the women, because you're not going to worry about him impregnating any of them. And he said there were 7 eunuchs, but he's the head one for the harem. Verse 5, Now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. So all of that reading of names that we did, when we read something like this, we know, oh, son of Kish, he was related to King Saul, who was the son of Kish. So he goes all the way back. He's from the tribe of Benjamin, and he is of the family of Saul. So then part of the reason we read all those names is this is how people would trace themselves back. We all have last names, and our last names are one of the ways that we trace back our ancestors. Verse 6, Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem, and I have a footnote, a Benjamite, or who? He? It is very not clear here. A Benjamite who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away. Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was, so she has two names. Hadassah is the Persian name, Esther is the Jewish name. The girl was fair and beautiful, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in the citadel of Susa in the custody of Haggai, I can't even pronounce it, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with cosmetic treatments and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen maids from the king's palace, and advanced her and her maids to the best place in the harem. So she's already know how to make friends and work with the system that she's in, and the head guy in charge, Haggai, has put her in a very comfortable place. Verse 10, Esther did not reveal her people or kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. Every day Mordecai would walk around in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Verse 12, the turn came for each girl to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their cosmetic treatment. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics for women. So again, we're trying to say just how rich is this Persian king who rules the entire known world of the time, that each girl is taking a year of treatments before they even come into the king. Verse 13, when the girl went in to the king, she was given whatever she asked for to take in with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she went in, then in the morning she came back to the second harem in the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She did not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So this is kind of like 1001 Arabian Nights. These are women going in, the king having sex with them, and then sending them. Now they're not in the harem. Now they are well, they're still in the harem, but they're in the different part of the harem. They're not in the unmarried harem. They're in the concubine harem. And if he asks for them, they could come back. But unless he asks for them by name, they're never coming back out of the concubine harem. Verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go in to the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch who had charge of the women, advised. So she has not only gotten favor with him, she knows to ask him, what should I take, what should I do, and trust his guidance. Now Esther was admired by all who saw her. Verse 16, when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Of all the virgins she won his favor and devotion, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet to all his officials and ministers, Esther's banquet. He also granted a holiday to the provinces and gave gifts with royal liberality. So everybody gets a day off, and there's another banquet. This whole book is full of banquets. Verse 19, when the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting by the gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, 2 of the names that we read earlier in the book, that we read. Why do we have to read the names? Because now 2 of them we hear about again. Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, had guarded the threshold, became angry, and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But the matter came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, both men were hanged on the gallows. It was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So not a strange thing to have somebody plotting against the king. As we read through Kings and Chronicles, there was plot after plot, especially in the northern kingdom. So many of the kings were killed, assassinated, murdered. So not a strange thing at all. It is strange that it was recorded, but that there's not a reward given to Mordecai. But that's the plot point, and we will hear more about Mordecai and the future. That is enough for today, but Esther is just such a fun book. And when you have the holiday of Purim, they retell the entire story in one sitting. It's not a very long book, but where 2 chapters is enough. And yeah, we live in a very different culture. But even back then, the men were trying to maintain their authority at all costs. Do not let the women have any rights, because what if they do? Oh no. So we don't live in that time anymore, and happily. But sometimes we have to be careful, because there's still a very strong tendency of many people to want to hold on to whatever their power is and not share it with whoever's below them, whether it's employees or staff or women or somebody of a different race or color or whatever the difference is. If you've got power, of course you don't want to give it up. And it's not a strange thing and not particularly surprising. Esther is a wonderful hero, because she is obedient to Mordecai, and then she is obedient to Haggai, and she also works with Haggai to say, okay, what do you think? What should I do? And to follow his guidance and to take advice is always a good thing. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord look at you with favor and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace. Like, subscribe, comment. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks for being here.